The morning light slid across the water in pale ribbons, carrying with it the sharp tang of salt and seaweed. The breeze climbed the bluffs and spilled onto the firing line, lifting the fine grit that clung to the concrete pads. Sarah Martinez had been there an hour already, her boots leaving a trail across the damp gravel as she walked the 500-yard line. She bent to tug a splintered target frame upright, its wood scarred from the punishment of high-caliber rounds. Her gloves, cracked at the seams from months of use, caught against the rough grain. She worked in silence, the way she always did. Methodical and steady replaced the target, smoothed the paper silhouette flat, tape each edge so it wouldn't flap in the wind. These small, invisible rituals belonged to her now, part of the rhythm she carried into each day at the range. The vest weighed on her shoulders, heavy with a stapler, rolls of tape, and a pouch for spent brass she'd collect once the shooting began. It wasn't glamorous work, but it paid better than waiting tables and gave her a schedule she could wrap around her classes. Nursing school had a way of draining not only energy but bank accounts. Her father's pension covered the essentials, but tuition notices stacked up like stubborn enemies refusing to be ignored. So Sarah learned to stretch herself thin long nights studying pharmacology, early mornings resetting target stands before the first shots cracked through the air. She had never expected the job to teach her anything more than patience. But in 8 months of moving up and down these lanes, she'd absorbed more than she realized. Every shooter who came through police officers, weekend enthusiasts, military units, became a case study in what worked and what didn't. Her father had taught her the basics years ago, pressing the importance of safety, breath, and trigger discipline into her hands, along with the .22 rifle he trusted her to carry. Shooting is like surgery, he used to say. Patience, precision, control under pressure. She'd laughed then, a 12-year-old with scabbed knees and more interest in summer afternoons than precision. But now, working this job, she felt the truth of his words in her bones. The black SUVs rolled in just after 7. She heard them before she saw them, the crunch of tires over gravel, the hiss of engines winding down. Doors opened, boots hit the ground in unison, and men began unloading gear with the clipped efficiency of people who had done this 1,000 times. Navy SEALs. Sarah had learned to spot them quickly, the way they carried themselves, the purposeful silence in their movements. They spoke in shorthand, words sharp as rifle bolts, gestures doing half the work. She kept her distance, as range staff were expected to, slipping into the background like a shadow. It didn't take long for the first cracks of gunfire to echo downrange. She watched from her post as Rodriguez, the youngest of the group, wrestled with his rifle. His shots scattered wide, dust kicking up far from the target. His breathing was ragged even from here, chest rising and falling too fast. His cheek never settled into the same place twice, and his trigger press looked more like a flinch than the smooth squeeze she knew it should be. Sarah found herself cataloging each mistake silently, wishing she could adjust his elbow, correct his grip, steady his rhythm. Frustration boiled over quickly. Rodriguez cursed, muttering about the rifle, insisting something was wrong with it. Sarah could see otherwise. His stance collapsed, his body tense, his trigger slap jerking the barrel off target each time. Chief Petty Officer Jake Sullivan watched with the stillness of a man who didn't need to shout to command attention. His eyes tracked every movement, the way a surgeon studies a patient before making the first cut. He said little, letting Rodriguez dig himself deeper, but the tightening of his jaw told Sarah his patience was thinning. The argument flared, Rodriguez tossing the rifle aside with a clatter, declaring it faulty. The words left Sarah's mouth before she realized she'd spoken. "The rifle's fine. You're pulling your shots left because you're anticipating recoil." Silence spread like smoke across the firing line. 8 men turned as one, their eyes locking on to the 2-3-year-old range assistant who had just critiqued a Navy SEAL. Sarah felt her throat tighten, but she stood her ground. Tape still in one hand, the wind tugging at strands of her hair. Jake stepped forward, studying her as if weighing something unseen. Without a word, he stooped, lifted the rifle Rodriguez had abandoned, checked the chamber, and then extended it toward her. "You think you can do better?" His tone carried neither mockery nor anger, just a sharp curiosity that pressed like a blade. Sarah's heart hammered, but her hands remained steady. This was the moment her father had warned her about when excuses weren't enough and proof was the only language that mattered. She reached for the rifle, and the air around them seemed to shift, the morning no longer routine but the start of something entirely new. Sarah settled the unfamiliar rifle across her knees, feeling its weight, the balance different from her father's hunting gun but not alien. The seals formed a loose semicircle around her, half curious, half doubtful. Rodriguez muttered something under his breath, but Jake's quiet presence silenced him before the words gained strength. The expectation in the air pressed heavy, but Sarah drew in a breath and forced herself to speak, her voice steady despite the hammering in her chest. "First problem was body position," she said, lowering herself onto the mat the way Rodriguez had earlier. She tucked her elbow in too tightly beneath her, mimicking his posture. The rifle wobbled slightly with each breath. "See this? No bone support. All muscle tension. That makes your sight picture unstable." She shifted her body, aligning bone and rifle into a natural platform. The weapon stilled, her movements deliberate. "Now it's stable without me fighting it. That's how you want it." A flicker passed through the circle. Skepticism softened to curiosity. Even Rodriguez leaned forward slightly, his scowl uncertain. Sarah adjusted her grip next. Second issue was pressure. He was squeezing too hard, white, knuckling the stock. All that tension transfers into the gun. She wrapped her hand firmly but gently around the rifle. "My dad used to say it's like holding a bird, tight enough that it can't fly away, gentle enough you don't crush it." The memory rose clear as morning fog. 12 years old, lying prone in the dirt beside her father, the smell of cut grass sharp in her nose. Miguel Martinez had placed a BB rifle in her hands and crouched beside her, voice low and calm. Asterisk patience, precision, control under pressure, asterisk. She remembered how seriously he'd spoken, as though teaching her something that mattered far beyond paper targets. "Breathing's next," Sarah continued, returning to the present. Rodriguez was holding too long, building tension and spiking his heart rate. "You breathe normally, let it out halfway, then pause. Natural respiratory pause. That's when you take the shot." She demonstrated, her chest rising and falling once, twice, before pausing at the midpoint. Her voice stayed calm, clinical, as if lecturing in a classroom instead of surrounded by elite operators. "And finally," she said, finger brushing the trigger guard, "control." He was slapping at it, jerking like he wanted to surprise himself. "That'll always pull you off target. Trigger press should be steady, straight back, no anticipation. When it breaks clean, you should almost be surprised." Jake's eyes glinted. He gave a small nod, as if she had passed a test he hadn't announced. Sarah eased into her firing position, adjusting until every part of her body felt aligned. She checked the wind, the faint tug across her cheek, then settled her crosshairs onto the 500-yard silhouette. Her breathing slowed. In that quiet pocket of stillness, her father's words came back. Asterisk. Shooting is like surgery. She exhaled, paused, and pressed. The rifle cracked, recoil rolling into her shoulder, smooth and familiar. Dust puffed at the target's center. She worked the bolt without lifting her head, chambered another round, pressed again, then again. 3 shots. 3 impacts clustered tight in the middle of the silhouette. The range went silent, except for the gulls overhead. "Holy shit," someone whispered. Rodriguez, staring in disbelief. Jake studied through his spotting scope, then looked back at her with something close to awe. 2-inch group, dead center, he announced. Sarah safed the rifle and handed it back, her hands steady until she felt the adrenaline ebbing. Only then did she realize the SEALs weren't laughing anymore. They were watching her with something she hadn't expected: respect. Engines hummed behind them. A black sedan rolled into the lot, dust trailing in its wake. A man in navy dress blues stepped out, posture erect, eyes sharp with practiced assessment. The SEALs straightened instinctively. "Commander Harrison," Jake murmured to Sarah. The officer's gaze swept the line, settling on the target downrange before shifting to her. "How's training progressing, Chief?" "Very well, sir," Jake replied evenly. "We've had unexpected assistance." He nodded toward Sarah. "Miss Martinez, daughter of Gunnery Sergeant Miguel Martinez." Recognition flickered across Harrison's face. "Martinez? I know that name. Excellent instructor before his injury." He studied Sarah as if weighing a possibility. "And what kind of assistance have you been providing?" Jake answered before she could. She diagnosed fundamental issues, corrected them, and then demonstrated a 3-shot group that qualifies for our advanced standards. Harrison's eyes sharpened with genuine interest. "Is that so?" Sarah shifted under the weight of command attention, wishing suddenly for the safety of invisibility. But Jake's steady expression anchored her. Later, as the commander departed with a nod of approval, Jake turned back to her. "You've got an eye for this," he said simply. "If you're interested, I'd like you to sit in on some of our advanced sessions. Nothing formal, just observation." The words landed heavier than she expected. She was just a college student in a worn vest and gloves, yet the line between her small, ordinary world and something larger had cracked open. She nodded, pulse thrumming in her ears, realizing this morning was no longer routine. It was the beginning of something she hadn't dared imagine. Sarah's days began to split in two. By night, she hunched over nursing textbooks, fluorescent desk lamp burning her eyes as she traced the pathways of nerves and vessels in thick anatomy atlases. She memorized drug names, their interactions, the side effects that could spiral into emergencies. Her notebooks filled with neat handwriting and highlighted phrases, each fact a step toward her license. But in the mornings, or whenever Jake called, she stepped into a different classroom entirely, one where the lessons carried the smell of gun oil and the weight of lives depending on the margin of an inch. At first, her presence in the tactical spaces was awkward, even unwelcome. She caught the sidelong glances, the muttered questions about what a civilian girl could offer men who had earned tridents and combat citations. Some ignored her completely. Others, like Rodriguez, wore their skepticism openly, waiting for her to stumble. Sarah learned quickly to say little at first, to watch the way she had on the range. What shifted things wasn't bravado but the precision of small, undeniable truths. A word about cheek weld, a gesture correcting elbow placement, a note on how the wind pulled a flag in one corner but not another. Each time she spoke, she backed it with results. And slowly, the doubt began to erode. The pivotal moment came on a humid afternoon with a group of Marine Scout snipers running a long-distance exercise. The shooters were solid, but their rounds kept drifting off target in a way that confused even their instructors. Sarah lingered near the spotting scope, uneasy about speaking. She traced the lay of the land with her eyes, following the scrub grass that leaned one way at the ridge and another in the valley. She noticed the shimmer above the sand, the faint mirage bending upward where the sun hit unevenly. "There's a secondary wind channel," she finally said, voice quiet but firm. Heads turned. She pointed toward the far left, where a low gully funneled a cross breeze invisible to the flags. "That's why your holds look good but the rounds push wide. It's hitting them halfway." One of the instructors tested her theory, adjusting the hold as she described. The next shot punched into center mass. A silence followed, then a low whistle. The students reset their sights, this time compensating for the hidden current, and groupings tightened immediately. Sarah felt the heat in her face, but also the shift in the air. They weren't just looking at her anymore, they were listening. That night, she was still replaying the moment when Rebecca Chun walked into her life. Former Army officer, now running a training contractor that specialized in advanced marksmanship instruction, Chun carried herself with sharp, businesslike confidence. She'd heard about Sarah through channels that spread faster than rumor, and she wasted no time. "You have something rare," Chun said across the table of a modest cafe. Not just skill, but the ability to translate it. Most of our instructors can shoot brilliantly. Fewer can teach it. You can do both. The offer she laid out was staggering. Triple Sarah's range pay, flexible scheduling, travel opportunities, access to advanced resources. But it came with expectations: long days in unfamiliar places, responsibility for students who carried rifles into real battlefields. Sarah felt pulled taut between two futures. One led to hospital wards, IV drips, the steady rhythm of patient care. The other opened into a life she'd never pictured: contracts, training grounds, the trust of warriors who had once doubted her. That evening, she laid it out for her father at their worn kitchen table. Miguel Martinez listened, silent, his weathered hands folded. When she finished, he didn't hesitate. "Mija, you've been given a gift. Not just to shoot, but to teach. You don't waste gifts, you use them." Her supervisor at the range was easier than expected, agreeing to adjust her shifts around contractor commitments. School would remain, demanding as ever, but now balanced against something far larger. The fear didn't vanish. Pride and doubt wrestled inside her. Was she betraying her plan? Stretching herself too thin? Pretending at a life she hadn't earned? But beneath it ran a steady current of resolve. When she finally called Chun back, her voice was quiet but firm. "Yes," she said, "I'll take it." In that moment, the balance of her life shifted. The student who replaced targets for others was gone. In her place stood someone stepping into two worlds at once, knowing each choice carried weight and ready to find out how far precision and courage could take her. The sun was barely up when Sarah stepped onto the range, the air already alive with a low murmur of voices and the clatter of rifles being unzipped from cases. Today wasn't training, not in the quiet, watch, and correct sense she'd grown used to. This was a test competition style: multiple ranges, shifting conditions, nothing scripted. She felt the weight of it in the eyes around her. Operators from different branches, instructors with decades behind a scope, and a scattering of skeptical onlookers who still couldn't reconcile the image of a nursing student standing in their circle. She adjusted her vest, slid her gloves on, and reminded herself of the simplest truth her father had ever drilled into her. Asterisk master yourself first. Asterisk one target at a time. The first string came easy. A familiar rifle, a calm morning wind, silhouettes popping up at set distances. She read the mirage off the sand, held a hair right, and broke the trigger clean. The bullet landed where it should, then another, then another. 5 down, 10 down. She kept her breathing steady, resisting the urge to look at the growing pattern of hits. But the test wasn't meant to stay comfortable. By the second phase, they swapped rifles, different balance, different optics. She ran her fingers along the stock, noting the rough edges, the heavier pull on the bolt. She closed her eyes briefly, hearing her father's voice again. Asterisk, every rifle speaks, Mija. Your job is to listen before you pull the trigger. Asterisk. She listened, adjusted, and kept the rhythm alive. The wind shifted in the afternoon, trickier now, snapping flags in different directions. Sarah knelt in the dust, squinting at the subtle lean of brush across the ridge. The others fired quickly, confident in their holds, but their groups widened. She slowed down instead. One breath, two, pause, squeeze. A small puff of dirt appeared just where she'd expected. A second, a third, a fourth. The rhythm became hypnotic. Settle, read, squeeze, cycle. Each shot a ritual. By the halfway mark, word was spreading. A few shooters drifted closer between their turns, watching her carefully. Rodriguez, now less adversary than reluctant student, stood behind her spotting scope, muttering with awe at every hit. The doubt that had once circled her was thinning, replaced by something quieter: respect. Still, fatigue pressed in. Her shoulder throbbed from recoil. Her eyes stung from hours behind scopes. The temptation whispered enough was enough. She had already proved her point. She thought of her textbooks at home, the safe path of hospital wards and steady paychecks. She could retreat into that life and no one would fault her. But she also thought of her father's steady hands guiding hers, of his belief that patience and precision mattered because they saved lives. The rifle was heavy, but the choice was heavier. She pressed on. The count climbed 80, 85, 90. Each target fell like another rung on a ladder she hadn't known she was climbing. By the time she chambered her 100th round, the range had fallen into complete silence. Sarah settled into the dirt, breathing through the burn in her muscles. The crosshairs steadied. She let out half a breath, found the pause, and pressed. The crack echoed. Dust bloomed center mass, 100 in a row. For a moment, no one spoke. The silence stretched, then broke in a low whistle, a whispered curse, the shuffle of boots as men exchanged glances. Faces that had once dismissed her now looked with something else entirely: recognition, opportunity, doors swinging open in their expressions. Jake lowered his binoculars, eyes meeting hers with quiet pride. Sarah cleared the rifle, set it down, and exhaled. The tension drained from her limbs, replaced by a strange calm. She had crossed something invisible, a threshold she couldn't step back from. Later that evening, in the quiet of her small kitchen, she unpacked her range vest. She folded her gloves, set her notes aside, and glanced at the open syllabus on the table. A bill marked "Times Paid in Full Time" sat beneath it, her first victory over debt. She picked up the phone and dialed home. Her father answered on the second ring, his voice carrying the warmth of a man who already knew what she had done. "I hit 100 today," she told him softly. On the line, silence. Then, the sound of his quiet laugh, proud and certain. She closed her eyes, letting the moment settle. Nursing school was still ahead, but now there was something else. Another life. One she hadn't expected, waiting for her. And it had begun with a single moment on a firing line when she decided to speak up.